Welcome and good afternoon. My name is Shane Lopez, Gallup Senior Scientist in Residence, and I want to welcome you to a review of the public perception of U.S. education. In the past year, we've conducted two polls, one with our partners at PDK and one with our partners at Lumina Foundation, examining what Americans think about education from kindergarten through higher education. You're going to hear a lot about statistics today. You're going to hear a lot about these 2,000 Americans that told the story of the rest of the Americans and what they think about education. So I want to start by grounding you a little bit. You'll hear a great deal about great teachers and a good deal about the value of an education. So in the beginning of our time together, because we'll spend a lot of time together the next 2 hours or so, I want you to think about your best teacher. Just take a snapshot of that person in your mind. And then also think about the value of the education you've received over the years. So that great teacher and the value of the education you received over the years. Just as a way of introducing myself, I'll talk a little bit about my favorite teacher. Her name was Dot Shales. And Dot was my fourth grade science teacher. And for some reason, she read to us from Where the Red Fern Grows every day before recess. So if we got done with our science work on time, we got to hear about these wonderful dogs and this little boy. And it was just a wonderful story. And none of us understood why our science teacher was reading a book to us, but we all loved it. And years later, when we get connected again as Dots and Dragons from our elementary school, we all talk about Miss Shales and how she motivated us to get our work done and to stay interested in science. Regarding the value of education, I want to publicly thank the many, many folks who loaned me money for my own education, and thank them for all the years they've given me to pay back said money. We'll hear more about that later today. But first, I'd like to hear from the Dean of this wonderful Graduate School of Education and Human Development, Dr. Michael Foyer.
Thanks very much, Shane. Welcome to George Washington University. It's a great pleasure. I'm delighted to have this chance to host such a wonderful event. I know we have a number of folks here from the press, so I'm going to do the where, when, and why in my 3 minutes. First, where you are. You're in the Jack Morton Auditorium of the George Washington University, which was founded in 1821 by an act of Congress to fulfill a great dream of President Washington to establish an institution in the nation's capital to prepare leaders for the future. That's where you are. When are you here? Well, timing is really everything, or it's at least important. If this event had been scheduled for just 9 days from today, chances are there would have been no room in this building and no parking in the neighborhood. Because that's when we will bear witness to what I have always felt is one of the uniquely American educational rituals that takes place all across the land around this time of year. On August 27th, if you are nearby, you'll have the chance to observe one of our most delightful and optimistic and hopeful and hallowed traditions, when roughly 2,300 members of the class of 2015 arrive here, many of them accompanied by their proud parents and grandparents and envious younger siblings, tumbling out of their station wagons. I know I'm dating myself. We don't have station wagons anymore. That's the way I remember this event. Carrying backpacks. In the old days, it was stereo equipment. Now it's small iPhones, iPads, and other such devices, along with their steamer trunks, and they will be met by a hardy group of sophomores and upperclassmen and women who will help them get oriented to their new home where they will spend about 4 years. Our class of 2015 was selected from a pool of over 21,500 applicants, representing coming from 45 states in the U.S. and from 40 countries around the world. These young people and their families may not all know the statistics, for example, about the long-term economic benefits to a college education, but I think they are clearly making a very rational decision. Many of them will finish in 4 years. In fact, most of them will. And according to our records, we know that within about 6 months after graduation, 2/3 of them will have jobs, more than 20% will be in graduate school, the rest will likely be in the military, in some kind of volunteer service, such as the Peace Corps, or in other socially and economically useful activities. And while they are here, a very large percentage will be engaged in some kind of internship, and about half will spend at least a semester studying and living abroad. It's a remarkable experiment that has been underway for several hundred years. And that brings me to the context, or to the why question. Why are we here today? And that's because with this great experiment, there is a cacophony of opinion and a cacophony of expertise. And we know, and we are very grateful to be able to have the results of this ongoing, remarkable survey that Gallup and PDK and now Lumina have been involved in for a number of years, as a way to bring some coherence, to bring some data to bear on this great cacophony of opinion and expertise. What better place to do that than in a university? And that's partly why I'm so honored to have the chance to host this event, because in many ways, the introduction of data about something that we hold so dear, the future of American education, is exactly one of the functions of a great university. So it's very much a pleasure to welcome you here on behalf of all my colleagues in the Graduate School of Education and Human Development and across the George Washington University family. I'm very much looking forward to hearing some of the details from the survey, as I know you all are as well. I'm very happy to turn this back now to Shane Lopez.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you, Dean Foyer. He reminded me of a wonderful day, my first day of college, when I started accruing the aforementioned student loans. We're going to throw a lot of information at you, and I want to help you make some of that stick. Now, each of us comes with our own pet issue as it relates to education, and I do appreciate that. So I could listen for every time that Bill talks about the hope of American students, that Dwayne talks about well-being across American campuses. But what I'm trying to do today, and what I encourage you to do, are think about those issues that bridge K through 12 and higher education. Those commonalities, those points of discussion that maybe we don't have across K through 12 and higher education. Also, I'd like you to think about where the public will lies today. Where does the public will lie in terms of how we can reform education, change education, improve education? And then finally, I want you to think about what role does public policy play in acting on that public will to make for a better K through 20 system. On that note, I want to turn things over to my good friend and colleague over at PDK. He's the executive director at PDK, and he'll talk about this year's 43rd annual PDK Gallup poll results. Bill Bashaw.
Shane, great job framing the issues today. Americans expect quality in the food we eat, the clothes we buy, the cars we drive. So it's not surprising that there's an increasing demand for quality in our public schools. And this conversation about quality is starting to focus on more than just the schools. It's starting to focus on teachers. Among other things, this year's PDK Gallup poll results shows that Americans recognize the need for high-quality teachers in order to have high-quality schools. There's a lot more to this story, but first I want to tell you a little bit of background about PDK and the poll that we're doing for the 43rd year. Phi Delta Kappa is a professional association of 30,000 educators. It includes teachers, principals, superintendents, and professors. And it's this variety of education professionals that makes us unique. Through our highly regarded magazine, The Cap'n, we serve as a trusted voice and advocate for public policies that support improved teaching and increased student learning. So this is the 43rd year PDK has partnered with Gallup to conduct a poll of the Americans' attitudes toward the public schools. It's a national poll of approximately 1,000 Americans age 18 and older. A complete copy of this year's report is available free at our website, and if you just search on pdkpoll.org, you'll find it. And those of you that have an iPad, you can go to the Apple App Store and also download a free copy of the poll. And if you haven't downloaded Wild Birds yet, you can do that too. There are several things that distinguish this poll from many other public opinion polls. First, the topics are identified by a bipartisan advisory panel that convenes each year. Second, our report is comprehensive. We provide data responses to every question that we ask and a verbatim copy of the question just as it was asked. This allows readers to carefully judge the responses as it relates to the wording of the question. And third and finally, because we conduct the poll annually, we can closely monitor changes in the public's opinions about their schools. Almost half of the questions we asked this year were asked previously, giving us a glimpse of how American attitudes toward public schools has changed or not changed from year to year. Now let me revisit the issue of teacher quality. Americans recognize that good teachers are the fastest route to education reform. They understand that in order to have quality schools, we need to have quality teachers. They believe we need to recruit and retain the best teachers we can and to remove ineffective teachers. In this year's poll, 74%, 3 out of 4 Americans, said that they would encourage the brightest person they know to become a teacher. 67% believe that we should recruit high-achieving high school students to become teachers. And 2/3 of Americans say they would want a child of theirs to take up teaching as a career. Americans also believe that encouraging high school and college students with skills in science and math they should become science and math teachers, and that's just as important as encouraging them to become scientists. So it's clear that Americans recognize the importance of getting quality students to become the next generation of great teachers. Though Americans express support for actively recruiting high-quality teachers for the future, they also feel pretty good about the teachers who are in the classroom today. In fact, 71% of Americans have trust and confidence in our current public school teachers. Changing topics, each year, PDK Gallup poll asks Americans to grade their schools, much like we ask teachers to grade students. This year, 51% of Americans gave the schools in their community a letter grade of either A or B. And that's been relatively unchanged for a number of years. That's the middle line that you're looking at on the graphic, the blue line. I want to concentrate on the other 2 lines for a minute. When we ask parents to grade the school that their oldest child attends, 79% gave that school either an A or a B. And as you can see, that's the highest grades ever assigned by parents in the U.S. since we've started this poll. And that's the red line at the top. However, only 17% of Americans gave letter grades of A or B to the nation's schools as a whole. That's the bottom line, and you can see how it's trended. We continue to be surprised by the declining grades that Americans gave our nation's schools as opposed to the improving grades that parents give to the school that their oldest child attends. On the one hand, they're the highest grades we've witnessed. On the other hand, they're the lowest grades we've witnessed. Now, I suppose it makes sense to some degree when you think that parents know teachers in their local schools. They're their neighbors, their friends, people that they run into at the grocery store and in their community. So it's easier for them to know more about the schools in the local community. When it comes to our nation's schools as a whole, people are much less familiar with the issues. They rely upon what they hear or read in the news. And as we know, much of the news has been driven by the No Child Left Behind legislation passed by Congress almost 10 years ago. And in fact, in this year's poll, 68% of Americans said that they're more likely to hear bad stories about teachers than good stories. We also asked Americans to assign letter grades to teachers, to principals and other administrators, to school board members, and to parents, and also to President Obama. In comparison with the last time we asked the question, and that was in 1984, teachers and principals' grades have increased significantly. Those are the two sets of bars on the left side of the graphic. At the same time, the grades assigned for parents and school board members has remained relatively unchanged. The president's grades, after declining last year, improved this year, with 41% of the respondents assigning him either an A or a B for his performance in support of public schools. But of course, the grades assigned to the president are related directly to the political affiliation of our survey respondents. And I know that's a shocking discovery to all of you. This year, after the highly publicized debates over collective bargaining in states like Wisconsin and Ohio, we decided to include a couple of questions on the topic, using a question that we had asked previously way back in 1976. We hope to get a snapshot of public opinion today as compared to opinion 35 years ago. And this is where the story gets complicated. 47% of Americans believe that teacher unionization hurts the quality of public schools, with only 26% believing that it helps. On the other hand, in the recent disputes between governors and teacher unions over collective bargaining legislation, 52% of Americans side with the teacher union leaders as opposed to 41% who side with the governors. And there's lots of different ways to interpret these results. You know, it could be that Americans believe or perceive that the teacher unions are protecting bad teachers. And as we've seen over and over in the questions that we ask, Americans are looking for high quality among their teachers. I think the teacher union leaders at the national level recognize this and are aggressively addressing that perception with lots of initiatives focusing on the quality of the teacher workforce. And the question is, locally and at the state level, what kinds of activities will teacher union leaders also take? At the same time, Americans have consistently felt that teachers are underpaid. So it could be that they worry that legislation restricting collective bargaining could result in lower salaries for teachers. Not only would that be tough for the current teacher workforce, it would also make it more difficult to attract bright and dedicated people into the teaching force in the future. We continue to monitor Americans' opinions about public school choice, public charter schools, and school vouchers. 70% of Americans favor the idea of public charter schools. And that's up from 42% approval rating when we first asked the question in the year 2000. That is a significant change in opinion over just the course of one decade. Yet when we asked about school vouchers this year, 65% of Americans oppose allowing students and parents to attend private school at the public's expense. And that's the highest opposition percentage registered in the last 10 years. So before we shift to the next portion of the program, I want to thank our partners at Gallup, Connie Rath, Dean of Gallup University, and Shane Lopez, who's the co-director of the poll with me. Also want to thank the members of our advisory panel that met last February, and if you get a copy of the report, you'll see their names listed there. And finally, I'd like to thank Joan Richardson, who is our Kaplan editor-in-chief, and her staff for their editorial and design support. Now, we saved the most interesting results on digital learning and technology for last, and we've invited two distinguished gentlemen to share their interpretation of the results with you. Former Governor Bob Wise from West Virginia and Tom Vander Ark. Now, I do need to tell you that former Governor Jeb Bush from Florida had planned to be here with us, but at the last minute couldn't become available, and I just found out why. His first grandson just arrived, and he wanted to be home with his family. He did send a statement, and if you don't mind, I'd like to share that briefly with you. Governor Bush said, "The results of the Phi Delta Kappa Gallup poll released provide insight into American perceptions about public schools in America, including the role of technology in providing quality education to today's students. The poll reflects a growing demand by the public to shift the paradigm of education from survival of the system to a student-centered approach. The findings underscore the need for lawmakers and policymakers to advance bold reforms to transform education to better prepare students for the demands of colleges and careers in a digital age." But what I want to do is ask our two leaders, Governor Wise and Tom Vander Ark, to join us up here on the stage. And we're going to ask for them to react to the component of the poll on digital learning. Governor Wise is the president of the Alliance for Excellent Education, an organization dedicated to implementing policy so that all students can achieve at high academic levels and graduate from high school ready for success in college, work, and citizenship. 1 year ago, Governor Wise launched the Digital Learning Council, a group dedicated to identifying policies that will integrate current and future technological innovations into public education. And he launched a national campaign, Digital Learning Now, in an effort to advance policies that will create a high-quality digital learning environment to better prepare students. Mr. Tom Vander Ark is the founder of Getting Smart, an online community of people passionate about teaching innovations. He is also the CEO of Open Education Solutions and a partner in Learn Capital, a fund focused on innovative learning tools and formats. Mr. Vander Ark was the first executive director for education at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and also a former school superintendent. So please join me in welcoming Governor Bob Wise and Tom Vander Ark.
I want to thank PDK and Gallup very much for this poll. As the dean said, it's a critical time, that ritual of students returning all the way from pre-K, all the way to grade 20 or even on to graduate school. But it's also a time when legislators are going to be returning, when Congress is going to, yes, they are coming back. Congress is going to be returning, and governors are preparing in August and September their budgets to present for the next year. And important decisions will have to be made, particularly in a very tough budget climate. I'm very sorry Governor Bush is not able to be here. He's actually the one who created the Digital Learning Council and called and asked if I would co-chair it. And now the Digital Learning Now initiative is so much his initiative. But from what I learned from this poll, and I think he would be very happy as well, is that what I learned from this poll is that the 10 elements of a high-quality digital learning system that 100 representatives of the Digital Learning Council that Governor Bush convened and I co-chaired, and Tom was so much a part of, went back in, I think, last year, and then announced it in December, that those 10 elements of a high-quality digital learning system that are designed to be a roadmap for states, they're essentially borne out in the public attitudes expressed in this poll. And And I want to go over just a few of them because this poll taken in its entirety, not just the digital learning section, but particularly the sections on higher education, post-secondary certification, and teacher effectiveness, they all come together to say the same thing, that the public understands and is willing to move forward on blended learning. When we think of digital learning, or sometimes called online learning, or sometimes referred to in the poll as computer learning, there are two images that can come to mind. One is a child or 100 children in a gym with laptops up. I call that my educational technology Rorschach test. How does that make you feel? Some say opportunity, some say depersonalization. Well, or is it a situation where there is an effective teacher in the classroom in a traditional place called school, and yet you now have the best content and often in pedagogy as well coming digitally? That's blended learning, defined by the Insight Institute and others. And so what this poll is, to me, confirms is that this public understands the need for blended learning. It understands that when half the respondents in an earlier section, almost half, say that they're concerned that they're not going to be able to get effective teachers in the classroom because of budget shortfalls. And so what is one approach to dealing with that? It is blended learning so that you get the best content digitally, as well as having teachers help guide and facilitate in that learning process. Another one is where when presented with, well, first of all, I think it's an incredible statement that 91% of the audience, of the population overall, and 95% of parents, up from 80% in 1996, understand and support and approve of internet access in the classroom and want it, and think it's important. And then I think also it's important too, then when is a statement of blended learning, when the question was posed, would you want a more effective teacher? This one's a little tricky. When you want a more effective teacher with digital learning, or a less effective teacher but personally in the classroom, a majority said the less effective teacher in the classroom. Let me suggest to you that's a false choice.
Right.
And that,
why not best of both?
Well, why not the best of both?
Right.
And with digital learning, you truly get that. And so the one suggestion I would make for future polls, and I think it's quite a statement that PDK and Gallup devoted such a large portion of this poll to digital learning. It's a statement of how far it's advanced. But one suggestion I would have is that, that we look at and approach it from a more blended learning approach, because that's truly the Web 2.0 of education. One last note, and then turn it over to Tom, who is truly one of the nation's experts and has guided so much of this effort in the last decade. One suggestion, or one thing I would note is, this poll is critically important to policymakers right now, because whether they're talking, because as we deal with, and I know Tony Carvalho and Jamie Marasotis and others are going to be talking about this in a minute, as we deal with demand for a much greater skilled workforce, for many more post-secondary certifications, and we also deal with a rapidly changing and not very good budget climate. All of this is about how can we be more effective and improve student outcomes and improve teacher performance. And what this poll suggests is that with digital learning, the public believes that they want effective teaching, and they want they want high student outcomes, and they can have both. Tom?
Well, I just want to, again, say thanks to PDK and Gallup. I also want to thank you, Governor, and Governor Bush, because you were among our best education governors in the last decade, and you've been a real champion for the last 6 years on the dropout crisis in America, and the way you've connected, you know, a passion for that crisis with the opportunity around digital learning, I really appreciate. I want to talk about a mistake, or at least a mistaken impression that came from this poll. A few minutes ago, before I walked in, I got a headline, a news e-blast that said, America doesn't support online learning, and they were quoting this survey. And I don't think that could be any farther from the truth, because we
91% seems to be pretty, in my former business, that was pretty good.
Here's the mistaken conclusion. There was one interesting question about, will digital learning allow kids to spend less time at school? And parents were split or slightly negative on that notion of kids spending more time at home. And then the report said, well, maybe parents don't support digital learning. Au contraire, I think parents just really appreciate the custodial aspect of school, right? And as the governor said, I think what parents and teachers realize that there's this great opportunity to combine the best of learning online and learning at school to create a longer day and a longer year, not a shorter day and a shorter year. So I think that was something that's been taken incorrectly, but overall, as you stated, I found two things really striking. One was 91% of people connected the internet with high quality learning, and second, that about that same percentage connected digital learning with college and career preparation. And I think those are two thoughtful insights that almost all of the respondents made.
So now we have an opportunity for your questions on digital learning or the other issues that we have in the PDK Gallup poll. We have two individuals that have microphones, and there's always the challenge of the first one who's going to actually step up and ask the question, but let's see if we've got a hand up, and we'll wait for a microphone and right over here, and we'll ask that you please introduce yourself. Tell us where you're from. Anybody?
Bob and I are happy to keep talking.
Here we go.
This is our favorite subject.
I think there's a gentleman here.
Yeah, we've got somebody up here.
Just to break the ice, not to be a naysayer, but recent research for North Carolina conducted by Boyd and his associates suggests that actually as the internet spreads across the landscape, that it actually is a factor in driving an increase in the achievement gap. And the speculative explanation for that was that they didn't have evidence that this was the true explanation. The speculation was that among lower income families, those who have less of a custodial ability, working late hours, et cetera, are not able to watch their children and monitor their internet use. And so as high-speed internet sort of swept across the North Carolina landscape, that was the site of the study, they actually saw a corresponding widening of the achievement gap between low income and high income. And the speculative argument was that because of the lack of monitoring in the low income households, that was the cause of this. I wonder how you would respond to that.
Technology is a powerful thing, and I think it can exacerbate good things and bad things. It will make good parents better, and I'm actually not certain that it will close the achievement gap, because it can do two things. It can lift the floor, but it can also blow away the ceiling. What I'm really optimistic about is the potential for technology to customize learning. That means more learning per hour, but also to equalize learning. And what we'll see happen nationwide over the next 4 years as we begin to implement online assessments in almost every state is that states and districts are going to make provision for universal access or for high access environments. So we will do a better job of making sure that every student is connected to the internet, as 91% of respondents said was important. So as we make sure that all kids have 24/7, 365 access to learning technologies, and as those technologies are incorporated into a long day, long year, and become a thick part of that student's educational experience, I think we have the opportunity, particularly in low-income neighborhoods, to shift a significant portion of that time to productive learning. So I'm actually optimistic that over the next few years, relatively quickly, that we can provide much better access for all students, but particularly low-income students, and that what that will do is is cause a relatively rapid increase in the percentage of students prepared for college and careers.
Yeah, and also, let me just note, I would also go to North Carolina, and I'd take you to Independence High School in Charlotte, Mecklenburg, where 63 students started an online program over the summer, predominantly low income, all got up, almost all, within the high 90s, got up to proficiency in reading and math over that period of time. Well, Mooresville, the Mooresville, North Carolina School District, where they have done a total digital immersion, it's over half at least free and reduced lunch, and seen similar results. So I think that my belief is that there are a number of positive examples where digital learning is having an impact. But once again, I think it has to happen on a blended basis, where there's an instructor that's helping guide that learning process at the same time that the student, whatever their income level is or their achievement level is dealing with the content coming in.
But, just let me add Rocket Ship as an example of that. Rocket Ship's a small elementary network in California, and they've used a learning lab basically to add 2 hours to the day. So it's almost an 8-hour student day. So it's a longer day, not shorter day. And it's almost all low-income kids, and they're among the best, or at least top scoring elementary schools in California. So
Carpe Diem in Arizona, Rollins High School in Wyoming. I mean, and that's also something that's borne out in this poll is the public clearly sees this as being a game changer for rural areas and for areas that have trouble getting access to high quality content and teachers. And particularly in certain subject areas, STEM subjects in particular.
Yes, sir.
Yep. My name is Decker Gongang with Communities for Teaching Excellence. To kind of piggyback on your question, what are some of the strategies on engaging parents in these new technologies so that they can become partners as technologies are rolled out, but also in the evaluation and kind of efficacy of if it's working? And one of the things I'm finding is that parents aren't engaged in the reforms going on in their systems. And so it's not necessarily that they're against technology, it's just that they're not a part of the process. So what strategies do you see in engaging teachers and parents or administrations and parents together as these reforms are?
I'm going to give a quick observation, and I'm willing to bet Tom has a bunch from his experience. One is, you touched on one of these, parents need to be clearly involved and from the get-go. And one way you do that, and particularly if you're working with a blended learning model, is make that school a learning center beyond the 7.5-hour school day. And so that parents now have access to that. And indeed, in many homes, and I think this may have been part of the previous gentleman's was alluding to this, in many homes, if you don't have either the internet access on a regular basis, the broadband access, or even the internet access devices, now you make that school the learning center for the parents as well as the student. But you're right that the parents do need to be brought, and that's clear in this poll as well, is that there's still a little not so sure amongst some parts of the population, and they need to be more informed. Tom?
I'll just echo a couple points that the governor made, that you hear us advocating for a long day, long year, a really rich school-based experience. I would agree with your comment that we generally haven't done enough to engage parents, and that bringing these new tools home has a lot of potential, but it's going to require parents to be parents and to be involved and contribute. And so we're going to have to help build that capacity. So I appreciate the comment.
Back here? Yes. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. Bill Bartolini from the George Washington University. I often hear people talk about the fact that there's such a breadth of information on the internet. How do you deal with quality and finding the right educational materials? Does the survey address this in any way, or do you have some hints for us to find a particular way to winnow to the right quality information?
We'll take that one.
That's a fantastic question, right? We a decade ago, we passed this profound threshold of human existence where anybody with broadband can learn almost anything for free or cheap. That's a profound threshold in the human experience. And just in 2009, we passed this inflection point with devices sold and with cloud-based services and with apps downloaded serious inflection points that means life on this planet is quite different, right? And we're trying to figure out what that means for ourselves, but we're here today trying to understand what it means for our schools. We're now 15 years into this information abundance, and I actually don't think we've made much progress answering your question of how to sort and synthesize. And sometimes it almost feels like our kids are better at it than we are. But in the precise area that you're describing is where we'll see the most important breakthroughs of the next decade. And very specifically, we'll see breakthroughs in search technologies. We'll see breakthroughs in monitoring and data mining. So watching a set of behavior patterns, learning about motivational profiles, and then using that data to drive a smart recommendation engine. So as kids make the shift to personal digital learning, one of the profound things that's not often discussed is that almost all of those learning experiences are going to be rich with assessment data and a lot of behavioral data that tells us about engagement and the sorts of experiences that are most productive for certain kinds of kids. When we turn that data into a smart recommendation engine and then face it back at the world, we will become much better before the end of the decade at doing exactly what you suggested and making sense of a sequence of learning experiences. And so when Governor has talked about blended learning, my quick snapshot of what my ideal picture is a smart playlist tailored to each student based on this recommendation engine that's helping to build knowledge and skills, and then a really rich team-based, community-based set of projects that engage students in very authentic ways and producing authentic work products, and that the mixture of those really represents the best potential that we can bring together for kids.
Question of quality really wasn't addressed in this poll, but it is, I think, one of the seminal issues that's facing us in taken to the school board level and to the state level is as we move into this era where much more access to information, a lot more providers of who is it that determines what it is. And the one thing we have to avoid is simply strapping on the current textbook approval process onto data quality and content process. We have to, and by the same token as you simply can't hand every child a laptop and say, now we've got a digital strategy. What is the total environment that you've created to work in? And so the issue of quality, I think, but once again, not simply judging it by what we've been doing the last 100 years.
Thanks.
Got a question down here.
My name's Martin Apple from the Council of Scientific Society Presidents. If you were to picture in the future or even presently, what would be the best outcomes? What would be the best measures of outcomes that you could put forth, realizing that they become the drivers of what happens when you do that? How much would you focus on creative ideas? How much would you focus on problem solving, critical thinking, and so forth? What would be the outcomes that you would really try to measure to drive the system forward in the best possible way?
That's a great question.
And you're giving it right to me.
Yes.
I would.
So good. I need a minute to think about that one.
No, well, those outcomes, I think, but those are what I call the deeper learning skills. It's what you take as core. It's joining the core content knowledge that's so important to the creative thinking, the critical thinking, the ability to collaborate, the ability to communicate, and the ability to self-direct learning. And so it's developing a whole new set of performance assessments that is, some of which is currently underway in a formative stage, not formative in the sense of testing, but in being formed, in the development of the Common Core standards, which 44 states have adopted in the District of Columbia. In those states that haven't, Virginia included, have still also moved to a college and career-ready standard. And what the assessments that are being developed by the two consortia, Smarter, Balanced, and PARC, only begin to to try and reach that. So being able to measure that kind of performance. I think you're much better able to measure that kind of performance digitally, because now you have adaptive technology and you can immediately get feedback to the teacher, but at the same time, it's also presenting a picture of where that student is in each of these areas. It also permits you digitally to be collaborating, whether with students in your classroom or students across the country or world. It permits you to be interacting, and it permits you to be working in teams. And so I believe that the actual digital process can lead you to improving those outcomes, and that the assessments are underway, but we're not there yet, as many of you know, and many of you are involved in helping develop them. Not completely developed yet, that'll get us there.
That's a great answer.
Over here.
Hi, I'm Fred Sansoni from Xavier University in Cincinnati. The smart recommendation engine that you spoke about, Tom, wouldn't that be a good teacher that could evaluate a student and make a recommendation as to what digital resources that they should choose? What would Shane say if he were a student today in a grade school 20 years, 30 years from now, when someone asked him who was his best teacher that he could remember?
Right.
Would he say it was the iPad or the iPod or a Mac 2?
It was that great algorithm that I had in 5th grade.
Yeah. I think that we need to really help the population understand that it's the people that interface with the students, not just the digital logarithms that are out there, and that the teachers need to be sensitive and responsive to the students' needs, not only from a digital point of view, but also their emotional state, their nutrition state, and all the other family complexities that they're involved with.
So thank you for that. Let me give you a very quick snapshot of School of One, because I think School of One, a math pilot in New York City, gives us a quick glimpse of what this looks like. They're the ones that really introduced the term playlist into education, or at least into my thinking of what the future looks like. So when the teachers come together at School of One in the morning and think about the math learning experiences their young people will have, that conversation is aided by a set of recommendations from an algorithm that has been chugging overnight. And those teachers can get together and say, okay, here's the learning experience that each one of our kids will have today. Now I can apply my professional judgment to the recommendation, because I've also noticed some things about the social emotional well-being of a number of kids, and as a result, I'm going to add a professional judgment to the micro schedule of my kids. So yes, it's informed judgment that drives the schedule. Here's another School of One example of the magic of dynamic scheduling. Most students spend part of their week in small group tutoring at School of One with a teacher. The magical part of it is that the teacher prepares a lesson knowing that every student around that table is ready for that lesson in that mode on that day. That's magic, right? When you compare it to the impossible task that we put in front of teachers every day of kids that are 5 or 6 years different in terms of their reading skill and their math skill, 30 at a time, and ask them to teach a lesson, and you compare that to teach 6 kids who are all prepared to learn that lesson in that way on that day. That's magic, right? And if we can create more experiences where professionals can execute their craft thoughtfully and have a high opportunity to be successful, and then have time during the day to work with other professionals to apply judgment, that's magic. A last quick example is Rocket Ship, and the Learning Lab at Rocket Ship does a pretty good job of building some basic skills. And what the teachers at Rocket Ship would say is that it allows them to spend more time in class on critical thinking, on richer and deeper learning that Governor Weiss talked about. So I think we're both very optimistic about putting powerful hands powerful tools in the hands of learning professionals and creating a set of working conditions that are far more positive and places where they can be far more productive.
So let me take this a little different place. And I think Tom is absolutely correct. So I'm going to take it a little different place. One statistic for you, state of Georgia, and this can be any state. 440 high schools and 88 certified physics teachers. Now, you can take that to my state. You can take it in the District of Columbia. You can take it almost anywhere. We are not going to have the highly certified content teachers currently defined in every classroom. But what we can have is an effective teacher who, with digital content and digital learning, is able to guide and facilitate that. And incidentally, not having, I think, I'm not a teacher, but I would think, Dean, and to those of you who are in the profession, not having to be solely responsible for every day's lesson plan, the so-called sage on the stage, every moment, every moment in that classroom, but now able to, as some of this content is coming digitally, you're now able to spend time with the individual learning needs of that child. Right. This one doesn't quite pick up on this fact. It's pretty evident from the adaptive software that this one's not getting this. And now I can spend some time with each of these students. And incidentally, I've got a data system that's helping inform. Nothing is taking away from the traditional, the role of teacher as from Socrates or on continues, in fact, I think is only amplified. And that's one thing that comes out of this poll to me loud and clear. Not always, yes, it does come out loud and clear, although sometimes with a little tension in some of the questions. This isn't, it's not either or. It's high tech requires high teach. You've got to have good teaching in order for the technology to be effective too.
Up here in the second row, microphone. Here we go. Great. Thank you.
My name's Connie Spinner, and I'm with the Community College of the District of Columbia. We're a fairly new entity, and we're looking at how we can use the digital whole array of services provided in some new and different ways. This conversation has caused me to think about two things. First of all, scale, and secondly, gap. You know, we are still dealing with a digital divide that is growing every day between poor and minorities and middle class. At the same time, things are shifting markedly, and new things are being learned that have the potential for making that gap even larger. And where are the instances where we're taking what we've learned and using it to close the gap at the same time that we're promoting the new? I'm concerned that we're learning some fantastic lessons about what we ought to be doing to enrich the learning experience, but we haven't redefined what it means to teach. And I think that if nothing else, this whole array of technology is redefining it without having the public policy conversation. So I'd just like your reaction to those two things.
So I would start by saying there's no excuse for the digital divide. So states and
That might not be an excuse for it, but it exists.
It does, but it's time for state and district leaders to put a flag in the ground and say, after next August, every student in our care will have 24/365 access, and begin to make a plan to make that happen. You can do it now by shifting to online assessment and shifting to online instructional materials. You can probably also improve the quality of and access to your professional development. But it takes a planned shift from print to digital, and you have to think differently about your instructional materials and how you do assessment, and you have to think differently about what your staffing looks like. And it's complicated enough that maybe you have to break that shift into 2 or 3 phases. But the fact that the total cost of ownership has dropped below $200 per year per student for an access device makes it less expensive than buying a backpack full of books. So you can now make the financial case to make the shift, and we've tried to make the case today that if you're thoughtful about it, you can also create a longer day and a longer year and a better working environment for teachers and more support systems for kids. So we can, in the next few years, do away with the digital divide, but it will take courage and thoughtful leadership state by state and city by city to make it happen.
My wife and I bought an e-reader last year and it was $300. Today it's $114. And so the price points are dropping rapid. 3 years ago we couldn't have had this discussion based on the price of internet access devices, and now we also have to have access to the internet as well. What's the data plan? But if I could ask you a rhetorical question, I'm assuming that as almost every community college does, you have a high remediation rate.
Extremely high.
And so in a technology, so with digital application, do you have to, it seems to me you can move students through remediation at the rate they're able to progress rather than having them in class for a fixed amount of time. So that student that can remediate and get to where they need to be in math in a month doesn't have to sit and wait in a class with a traditional instructor, but can move ahead. And the student that needs more time, and this is really true and necessary in the K-12 system, the student that needs more time. So what I'm suggesting is that with technology in community college system, as well as the K-12 system, we have a much better ability to move students ahead at their rate that they can advance, a competency-based advancement, and then more quickly get them to where now you're able to do what you want to do to move them up to the level they came to that community college for.
You're absolutely right, and we are looking at this two ways. We almost started immediately as an Achieving the Dream community college. So we started out looking at how we improve developmental ed, and roughly 80% of our students are taking one or more developmental ed classes. We also, there's a whole group of us that said nobody should enter needing developmental ed, given the horrid statistic. So what are we doing to get them ready before they get there so that that's not an issue? So we've got a dual strategy around that. Our biggest challenge, and maybe no one else has this, is not our students or their readiness, or it's our teachers, it's our instructors, and their reluctance to look at the new role they have to play and the new kinds of skills. Because we haven't had a public policy conversation about this changing role that's emerging and shifting every day as a result of the kind of tools that are being made available from the technology.
Governor, Tom, do you want to respond to that last?
We agree.
Digital learning, it benefits students, it benefits teachers. By the same token, we need to be truly having learning experiences for both. And certainly, Dean, didn't mean to put you on the spot, but it also calls then on colleges of teacher education and other teacher preparation programs. I also see digital learning as being extremely powerful in what's today known as professional development. I think with digital learning, it's more of a sustained permanent professional enhancement, because now teachers will be able to do that enhancement with their peers in their, as opposed to what some of you call drive-by PD, or I always like, as a politician, I always love the opening day of school, because usually it's 300 teachers jammed into a hot gym, and I got to go speak to them for a while, and if I got to be there early enough, they weren't asleep yet. Sometimes when I left, they were asleep. But to me, this is about quality learning experiences for students and teachers. And I'm going to end as I began. It's about students and teachers, and both have an integral role, and digital learning has an integral role in bringing them together and getting the maximum learning outcomes for both.
Question way over here.
I'm Alan Richmond from Prince George's Community College, and I'm glad we moved on, because I'm interested in the difference between, we see a lot, I think, more work towards blended education with technology in the K-12 environment. But I'm particularly interested in any thoughts or feedback on recent legislation forced upon higher ed to really define our credit hour, and it seemed like that there was a look to define it as the sage on the stage, where innovative blending techniques might not really, quote unquote, count as actual instruction, where there was an hour-to-hour requirement for instruction, which kind of sounded a lot like a push by legislature to have direct instruction, and also about some kind of a tax on online online instruction and that. And so how do we balance this between the desire that we want to have high quality, right, and people recognize the need for technology and the importance of it, but yet there's still an attack on its legitimacy, particularly I think in higher ed. Right. I think there's a little bit of a different perception between technology maybe in the higher ed versus in the elementary, and about that.
You're actually way ahead of us in K-12. Yeah. But let me. You heard Governor Weiss talk about Governor Bush, but I just want to underscore the role that he's played here. A year ago when I visited him, he said, "Tom, this is all moving very quickly, but my sense is that legislators, state policymakers don't have a roadmap. I think they need a top 10 roadmap." And I described the data quality campaign that took about 3 or 4 years, and he said, "No, you don't understand. There's 27 new governors that are coming in the fall, and we have to be done in 100 days." And so the insight and the speed and the urgency that he brought to this task to try to lay out a policy framework to avoid the really dumb policies that you're describing, right? This is not thoughtful public policy, right? It is standing in the way of everything that we've described here as possible. And we see a lot of it in K-12. And actually, if you look at the digitallearningnow.com, if you look at the 10 elements, you'll find a bunch of very specific, almost redundant language, and you might wonder, why is that? It's because each of the bullets under each of those elements go after stupid barriers that exist that try to stop learning at a county boundary or at a district boundary, or as Governor Weiss said, take a textbook adoption process and put it on digital content, or seat time, right? So Digital Learning Now is an effort to create a policy framework that's thoughtful about this shift going forward. And we very well may need another one for community colleges, or to extend that to instead of being K-12, it ought to be K-14, so that we're more thoughtful about the transition. But it's the leadership of these two governors that are trying to create a framework for this revolution. That's why I think the work is so terribly important. So we appreciate your concerns. We're certainly working hard in K-12 to make this happen, and would certainly lend support to
I'm interested in your perspective, because, quite frankly, in K-12, we've been saying, well, higher ed's got this thing knocked out, but boy, we got to get it learned in K-12.
Right.
I bought an iPad the other day. I'm just curious, and I know many of you have bought a ThinkPad or something similar. So I bought it the other day. Now, how many of you, when you bought your device, asked the salesperson, I want a device that the person they worked on for exactly 180 days? That's my sole interest, that somebody worked on it for 180 days. I doubt it. You probably asked, I want how many gigabytes, what's the performance, how many apps? Well, why is it that we measure our children for their credit by nowadays? I understand up until about 25 years ago, but why isn't we measure our children by whether or not they sat 180 days in class? And this goes to our conversation of the need to advance, in which technology permits us to do now, is much better measure, assess, adapt learning for students so that they can advance at their pace. And this is going to be one of the leading issues, and I hope in the next poll test some of the policies that exist. For instance, if the state you're in requires that only an online certified, that the teacher that may be teaching online has to be certified within that state, sort of limits this, doesn't it? Right. That to me is like, incidentally, I can order a book online from a Barnes & Noble, but I have to go to the local bookstore to pick it up. So what are the policies that no longer apply and that we wouldn't tolerate in our own lives as an unnecessary frustration for our ability to be enriched via the internet, but we're denying our students?
Right.
So we're at the end of the time for our section of the program, but please join me in welcoming and thanking Governor Wise and Tom Vander Ark. Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful. Just a few quick comments. I'd love to see this discussion replicated across the country. Pick your topic that you're interested in, get two local experts, two national experts, hold a discussion about real data, about public perceptions, and then try to get to this place where, and thank you for bringing us there, bring us to that policy level of discussion and make us think hard about what we're doing well and some of the dumb policies, to use Tom's comment there. Also, I want to mention that you do have the PDK Gallup poll results, and they're also available online and via your app. Please share those results with folks. We didn't get a chance to talk about student readiness for the future, schools as well-being centers, and many other important topics. So please take a look at the PDK Gallup poll results. And now I want to say that, I want to remind you that we've been doing the PDK Gallup poll for 43 years. George Gallup himself started doing the poll over 4 decades ago, and I think he'd be pretty happy that we now have a partner focusing on higher education. It's been a joy to work with Lumina, and now I invite Dwayne Matthews up here, Vice President of Strategy and Policy from the Lumina Foundation, to talk about our perceptions of higher education.
Thank you very much, Shane, and thanks to all of you for being here. First of all, on behalf of Lumina, I want to comment on how really pleased we are to be able to join PDK and Gallup in what has been a long and very distinguished record around the poll. Adding the higher education component to the poll is something that we're extremely excited about, and it's something we hope will continue. I thought I probably should take a few moments before inviting, first of all, sharing some of the results with you, and then inviting Jamie and Tony to come up here and talk a little bit about the results, to explain a little bit about why Lumina was interested in doing this and why we see this as something so critical to our work as a national foundation focused on increasing access and success in post-secondary education. As Governor Wise mentioned, there is this growing national awareness of the need for increasing higher education attainment in the United States. You see this reflected in, starting with Lumina's own goal for increasing the proportion of Americans who hold high-quality post-secondary credentials to 60% by 2025. Perhaps you've heard of this goal. The current U.S. rate is around 40% right now, so it's a very dramatic increase in attainment that we're calling for, and we've seen a great deal of support for this framing of the issue and for this effort to increase attainment. It's reflected, of course, in the President's goal for making the United States the best educated country in the world, also measured in terms of higher education attainment at a rate of about 60% by 2020. Our colleague Tony Carnevale, who will mention in a moment, has documented the fact that about 60% of U.S. jobs will in fact require some college by the year 2018. So if you think 2025 is an audacious and ambitious goal for getting to 60%, Tony would tell you we don't have that long to get to 60%. So all of this effort, which is reflected in a number of states, governors, higher education associations, higher education institutions, all increasing their focus on increasing the numbers of students who go to college, but even more importantly, who complete college and finish with a college degree or credential, is something that I think is driving a lot of our work and a lot of the national discussions around higher education. But along comes the question of, are we in fact getting out ahead of the American people? Is this something that is too much of a inside baseball kind of discussion, where we're talking to ourselves about the value of education and it's not really recognized or not really understood by the public? How does the public see these issues? Do they also see this shift taking place? Do they believe there's in fact a need or an awareness of this desire that a lot of us are expressing to increase higher education attainment, to increase the number of people who go to college? And if so, what do they see as behind it? What is driving this concern? What is driving this issue? We felt that having some answers to those questions would be very useful to us, at Lumina specifically, but we thought also would be very useful to the broad community of educators, policymakers, and others who are very concerned about the same set of issues. And so that's what we zeroed in on in this section of the poll. And we found some results which we think are very, very interesting, and which I'm very pleased to have this chance to share with you. So if this works, hey, it does, great. Speaking of technology, here we go. So the first question, and I know it's a little bit small, so I'll read it. On a 5-point scale where 5 means strongly agree and 1 means strongly disagree, please indicate your agreement with each of the following statements. You may use any number between 1 and 5. It's a poll, okay? So the question is, or the statement rather, is having a college degree is essential for getting a good job in this country. And that word essential, I think, is very, very important. Not desirable, not nice, but essential. What is the answer? Those that strongly agree or agree with that statement are now 69% of the public. 69% of Americans believe that having a college degree is essential for getting a good job in this country. That is, we think, a very remarkable finding. And we think it reflects, again, this great shift that is taking place, that reflects the emergence of a knowledge economy, the fact that most jobs in this country, as Tony perhaps will talk about, and has certainly documented in his research, are seeing an increase in the skill and knowledge requirements attached with those jobs and across all occupations. That seems to be something that many Americans, most Americans, are very aware of and feel that it is tied to higher education and to the need for a college degree. There's another set of questions that asked, is a college degree or occupational certificate, and that's a very important distinction, some recognition beyond high school of competence and skill in an occupation or a college degree, is it very or somewhat important for financial security in the future? 95% agreed or somewhat agreed with that statement. So there's a very, very strong perception that this is, in fact, both necessary for financial security as well as for getting and keeping a good job. So let's go on. In your opinion, which one of the following is the main reason why students get education beyond high school? Now this one, you were asked to pick one, the main reason. And this may or may not surprise you. I would suggest that it does surprise some people to see this result. But there's the results. To earn more money, 53%. To get a good job, 33%. Those are far and away the top 2 reasons why people believe, Americans believe, that people go to college. Become a well-rounded person, learn more about the world. It's not that those are not important, but if you say what is the main reason people go to college, it's to get a good job and it's to earn more money. All right? Now, on a 5-point scale, where 5 is strongly agree, 1 is strongly disagree, what is your level of agreement with each of the following statements? And the statement is, in this case, people who have a college degree have a good chance of finding a quality job. Strongly agree or agree is roughly half, about 47%, believe that people have a good chance of finding a quality job. Now, I think we could talk at length about this and about whether this is a surprising finding or not. I would suggest that in today's economy, with all of the reporting about the difficulty of getting a job, about college graduates entering the labor market and not being able to find jobs, all of this sort of concern, that 47% believing that having a college degree gives you a good chance of finding a quality job, and only 10% really disagreeing with that statement, is in some ways, in this economy, a somewhat remarkable finding. I would suggest, I was frankly somewhat surprised to see that the negatives on that were as low as they were. Because even in this economy, even in this extremely difficult job market, people still seem to believe that having a college degree is the best form of insurance, the best preparation you can have to be able to go into the employment markets, to be able to go into the job market, be able to go into the workforce and get a good job. But finally, and this is the last slide I'll put up here of the data before asking Jamie and Tony to come up here and discuss this. Again, on the 5-point scale, agree being 5, 1 being disagree, college graduates in this country are well prepared for success in the workforce. So people believe that college is the key to getting a good job and to making money and having financial security. But only about 40%, 39% strongly agree or agree with the statement that college graduates in this country are well prepared for success in the workforce. And most people are neutral on that question, and fully a fifth, 1 out of 5, actually disagree with that statement. So if there's an area here that I think we really need to pay attention to, it is this. If Americans believe that college is essential, essential being the key word here, for success, but they are concerned about whether people who have college degrees, who come out of college, are in fact well prepared to be successful, I think we have some issues here that we need to think about and we need to talk about. So this gives you a flavor of the results. We're very excited to be a part of this, and we're very excited to have this and more information, which I encourage you also to delve into and look at about this, but I wanted to share these particular findings with you. So with that, let me invite Jamie and Tony up on the stage. Jamie Marasotis is the president and CEO of Lumina Foundation. Tony Carnevale is the president of the Georgetown University Center on Education and the Workforce. I won't give you a lengthy introduction. Suffice to say, these are two very respected, recognized experts in this field. I happen to work for Jamie, so you could take that with a grain of salt.
He has to say that.
But I have no reason to say that about Tony, so it must be true. So take it from me. These people know what they're talking about. We would like to encourage them to talk a little bit about these findings, particularly as it relates to what this changing and increasingly important relationship between higher education, education beyond high school, and the workforce and the economy. Jamie, could I turn over to you first?
Thanks very much, Dwayne. Let me first begin by thanking our hosts at the George Washington University, as well as our colleagues from PDK for their efforts here, and particularly the folks at PDK for their trailblazing work that we have followed over the course of many years. Frankly, I did not know it was 43 years, but I've followed this for most of my professional career. I haven't been working for 43 years, so I have some excuse. But I will say that this work very much motivated us to gain a better understanding of what's happening in terms of public perceptions at the higher education level. And there's an important reason for that, building on what Dwayne talked about. That is that as important as it is to focus on fixing our schools and improving our K-12 system, in fact, it's absolutely essential. It is necessary for our economic and social future as a country. All of that is, in fact, about getting students to the starting line. We have not succeeded in our task until the vast majority of those students achieve some form of post-secondary credential. And I think what this public perception survey shows overwhelmingly is that perception matches reality. What the public poll shows is that the public believes that in order to be able to get a job, you need to have some form of post-secondary education. And they're right. If you look at the unemployment data, the unemployment rates are dramatically higher for people with no post-secondary education compared to those with post-secondary education. In fact, at the height of the recession, the unemployment rate for people with high school credentials compared to those with college credentials was more than 2 to 1. Second, the public believes that in order to be able to get a good job, a high-quality job, you have to be able to have some form of post-secondary education. And again, they are correct. The vast majority of the jobs being created in our economy, the good jobs, require post-secondary education. Tony's data and others show that about 2/3 of all of the jobs being created require post-secondary education or will require post-secondary education within a decade. And so the public understands that the importance of getting a good quality education is critical. Finally, the public understands that one of the important outcomes you get from a college education is you make more money. Now, making more money shouldn't be the only goal of getting a high-quality education. All of these things that ranked fairly low in the perception poll about quality of life, about being able to think critically, et cetera, those are all important things. But being able to make more money is an important factor and one that we should not undervalue. In fact, what we see from the data is that the labor market, that is employers, are actually valuing people with college degrees at an increasing level. That is, what the labor market is telling us is that the premium of having a college credential as compared to having a high school credential is increasing. Again, in the last decade, the wage premium for those with a bachelor's degree compared to those with a high school credential has increased from about 75% to 84%. So the public is right. Their perceptions match the reality of what's happening in terms of the higher education system. Now, there's an interesting subset to all of this, which is the question about the value of a college education. That is, the cost of paying for higher education is very high, and from a current income or a current expenditure basis, it has become very burdensome for people who haven't planned, in some cases for decades, to pay for the increase in cost of college. I think that is a real challenge to higher education, and I think represents perhaps one of the biggest threats to our long-term success in this country is getting a handle on the high cost of actually delivering higher education. And you can see one of the things that's worrying the public in terms of what's happening in our higher education system, which is this question about the relevance of what they're getting out of the higher education system in terms of them being able to be successful in the workforce. Only about half of the public is fully sold on the fact that the quality of the education that they're going to get from higher education actually will match what they need to be successful in the workforce. I think that represents a significant challenge to higher education to reinvent itself, to realign and reinvent the business model in ways that are going to have a dramatic difference in terms of improving the outcomes of what we produce in higher education. Those outcomes, let me be clear, have to overwhelmingly be about learning. It is the learning that drives the quality of the education, and it is the learning that the employers are saying they need in order to fill those high-quality jobs that they need for their companies to be successful. So in the current environment, getting a college education isn't nice, it's necessary. The public absolutely understands that. To put it a little more bluntly, going beyond the data and in my own words, if you get a high-quality college degree, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to be in the middle class and perhaps even be more successful. To put it more harshly, if you don't have a college degree, there's a very high chance that you're going to be poor.
Well, Jamie and others have already said everything that I'd like to say and everything that I think is important in this opinion poll, but I haven't said it yet, so I'll take my turn. What is most striking to me is one of the things that Dwayne said, and that is, in spite of the pessimism, and other polls show deep pessimism on the part of the American public, pessimism that is in some respects well-founded. The people who forecast the economy are, as of a week or so, are now saying that we'll get increases in unemployment from 9.1 to 9.3% over the next several months towards the end of the year, and that we'll probably stay at 9% throughout 2012, which is bad news at the White House, and that will only dip below 9% in 2013. And so in spite of what has been a very long and deep recession, the longest and deepest truly since the Great Recession, where a recession that has had huge impact on this economy, people still believe, in fact more so as I understand it, people believe that it's necessary to get some kind of post-secondary education and training in order to be successful in the United States, to be middle class and the common standard among us. And that is true. As Jamie pointed out, in 1973, for instance, we had about almost 70% of the jobs appeared to require nothing less than high school. At least that's what the people in those jobs had. And virtually all of those people were in the middle class. If you measure the middle class, and you have to do it arbitrarily, there is no official number, but let's say it's between, in modern terms, about $35,000 and $85,000, then virtually all of those people were in the middle class back then. And now that 70% number, if you use the same bandwidth for middle class participation, goes down around 30%. And that includes a lot of the people who started out in jobs that didn't require college 30 or 40 years ago, but that do require college now, which is essentially the way this process works. What is underneath all this is something that started in the 1980s, after the 80-81 recession, for those of you who remember that one. It was the second worst recession since the Great Depression, for those of you who remember it. But after the 80-81 recession, we saw a profound restructuring of the American economy. Essentially, when we took the inflation away, employers were paying workers no longer in inflated dollars. So in those days, you could give a 10% raise, or you could give a 5% raise. Inflation was closer to 10, you just made 5%. But once the inflation were gone, the 5% raise was real. And so employers essentially set out, especially in manufacturing, utilities, transportation, but also elsewhere, set out to fire about 30% of their workforce. They could no longer afford to carry them. And what they did was they unleashed modern technology, which in these times, in what is essentially the third great technology revolution in economic history, was the computer. And the computer attached to all sorts of other devices. And that, what the computer does in the end and continues to do is that it automates particular tasks in everybody's job. And as a result of that, all the tasks that are left over are non-repetitive tasks and require higher skill. If there's an engine underneath this, that's it. The reason I raise that is that that engine runs faster now in recessions and has run faster in recessions for the last 3 recessions. So that now we get what are called jobless recoveries, which is something of a misnomer. It really means that the growth rate goes faster than the job creation rate. The amount of money we make grows faster than the hiring of people. And that structural change is now accelerating during recessions. And so the people who answered positively about higher education in this survey, they are themselves going to be proven right. Because when we come out the other side of this recession, it is virtually a sure thing that jobs that required high school or less will be a smaller proportion of this economy. And the much greater share, possibly not for a little while, we're going to live through more hard times, but by 2016 or 2017, I think most agree we'll be at an unemployment rate of roughly 6%. At that time, I suspect when this survey is done then, those numbers will get even stronger. What is unfortunate about all this is there are going to be a lot of people left behind. And they're not just going to be 18 to 24-year-olds who we need to find some way to move through the college system so that they can begin careers, make decisions about their education that will affect them over the next 40 years. But there are going to be a substantial number of people who are adults who will be structurally unemployed. That is, they won't have the skills necessary to go back to the industry or the occupation, and certainly not the job that they left behind. They'll need new occupational skill. They'll have to shift occupation. That is a very tall order in any economic system to do that with adults. We've never done it successfully yet. So there are 2 issues that are emerging here underneath this survey, and one is the larger one, frankly, which is how we educate our children, what kinds of chances they're going to get, and more, the education they get beyond high school really does determine their opportunities over a lifetime. Access to post-secondary has become the arbiter of middle-class status. And when you run the numbers as we have from time to time, it is true that the middle class is declining. But underneath that is this same engine. And what's really happening is people with post-secondary education are either staying in the middle class, or in the case largely of BA and above, they're moving up into the top 3 income deciles, above $85,000 a year. And people with high school or less are falling down. It doesn't mean that there aren't still high school jobs, I hasten to add. For 3 out of 10 of people who get high school at the moment and never get anything else, you can get a job for about $35,000. That is more robust, much more robust for males than for females. It's very hard for a female with only high school to get a job at 35 grand a year. It is not impossible for men because there's still enough manufacturing, construction, pole climbing, and utilities and so on to go around for boys. But women don't have access to those occupations, and the ones they do don't pay. So there is this poll, to some extent, the results will only get stronger, I think, as time goes by.
I've likened this 3 out of 10 situation that Tony's talking about to 2 simultaneous games of musical chairs. In one group, you've got the group with the high school credentials, and more of the chairs are being pulled out. And in the other group, you've got the people with the post-secondary credentials, and more of the chairs are being added. So the people who need who want a middle-class lifestyle are increasingly going to have to be in the game on this side rather than in the game on this side if they want to be successful.
All right, let's ask if any of you have questions. I'm sure you do. I hope you do. While we're getting the mics set, I want to ask a question, so I'm going to take the privilege of the chair to ask the first question. I can hear some in higher education, I suspect, expressing some concern over the way we frame these findings and say, you know, are we talking about turning our colleges and universities into sort of a massive job training system? And is this about training people for specific jobs, narrowing the curriculum, that sort of thing? Could you talk a little bit, both of you, about the nature of the skills and knowledge, the nature of the education that it is that people need in this economy?
3 words for you: no, no, no. The important lesson from this should be an increasing recognition that the things that will make you successful in life and make you that well-rounded person, that person who is successful as a parent, as a colleague, as a neighbor, are the same things that make you successful in a job. And in fact, the skills that employers say through surveys that we've seen from the Business Roundtable, from the Committee for Economic Development, lots of different places, show that what the employers most value are those things like critical thinking and problem solving, the ability to communicate, to be analytical. Those are all of the things that we believe we do best in higher education. So this conversation about are we training people for jobs or for life is in fact the same conversation, because those skills for life are the same skills you need to be successful, to get and be successful in a good job. Now, the conversation gets rockier from that point on because there are differing returns to differing types of credentials. And I think that's part of what Tony's most recent research is starting to show, is that we've got to begin differentiating the kinds of things that people are majoring in and the occupations that they choose. Not all of the returns are universally the same, but all of the returns for people with post-secondary skills and credentials are higher than those without those post-secondary skills and credentials.
I would I guess my sense of this is it's not an either-or kind of choice that we have to make here. First of all, the system as it presently operates is not an either-or system. Keep in mind that among BAs, only about 10% are in liberal arts and humanities. The other 90% are basically occupational or industry or professionally based. All graduate education is occupational or industry based. I mean, you can get a PhD in history and not find a job, but it's clearly intended to do something in history. So there is and when you go down to community colleges, less than half, but nearly half, are occupational. The other half are general ed degrees that are supposed to send you to a 4-year school where 90% of the degrees are in fact occupational. So and certificates, community college certificates, and test-based industry certifications, which are the new big bullies on the block now. Those are clearly intended to be occupational. So it's too late to worry about this for starters. Higher education, the good news in this is higher education has really been pretty responsive to market demands. There's an issue about whether it should be more so. Jamie and I agree, I think, that it should be more responsive than it's been. Young people need to know if they get a degree in architecture what it's going to pay. They can then decide to do what they want, but I think they should know. And then my final point about this is I do believe that the employment role of higher education is pivotal. Clearly, higher ed is supposed to satisfy all sorts of needs, learning for its own sake, individual human development. It's supposed to give us good citizens and good neighbors. But in the American system, you can't be a good citizen or a good neighbor or participate fully in the life of your times if you don't have a job. We don't make you vote here, but we do make you go to work. If you don't go to work, unless you have a very good excuse, the rest of us aren't going to take care of you. So if higher education doesn't deliver on its mission to get people employed, it won't deliver on all of its other missions either, is my bias about this.
Questions? Yes, first one right here. Okay, we'll take first one there, and then we'll come down over here next.
Hi, Deborah Humphreys with the Association of American Colleges and Universities. I want to go back to something that was asked in the earlier session about aligning policy with the needs to improve education, either in terms of completion or in other ways. And I want to ask about sort of how we help bring this message to policymakers in particular. I was just giving a speech 2 days ago in a state whose, I won't even name the state because it will reflect badly on them. And I was giving a speech to a faculty development group about changing the teaching and learning environment to improve both completion and quality. And I was also using some of Tony's wonderful data, which I do frequently, thank you, Tony, to talk about the changes in our economy, what people need, et cetera. And later I talked to a dean who was in the audience who also happened to be in that state a state legislator. Frankly, I've never actually met a college dean who was also a state legislator, but in this state, this actually happens. And she said to me, how do I help my colleagues in the state legislature understand this data, including Tony's? And I directed her to the wonderful charts state by state that you have in that report, Help Wanted and so forth. And she said, yeah, I showed them to some of my colleagues, and they're just not buying it. They don't buy it. They're not interested. And I didn't even really know what to say, because it's always felt to me that Tony's data, and clearly the public, agrees with your data. I mean, this poll clearly shows they get that there's a connection between the economic health of this state and investment in higher education. But in this state anyway, the state legislature was the key, and they couldn't get them to hear this message.
Well, part of the answer from my perspective, since it's Tony's data, I want to give him a chance to actually provide the real answer. But part of the answer from my perspective is, you may not believe it, but you know what? The public policy makers in Canada and Korea and 30 other countries that are our economic competitors believe it, because they're investing heavily in this kind of success. In fact, they're investing so much that they've started to surpass us in terms of attainment. Oh, and by the way, states that are your neighbors are probably also doing similar things, because there are some states that are taking the path that you're talking about, but there are several states now that this has become a bipartisan issue of very high accord among people, recognizing that increasing educational attainment is critical. One thing that I think is missing from many of these conversations that's probably worth mentioning is that the quality of the conversation about the Common Core and the K-12 changes is going to need to be matched at the higher ed level. By that I mean we're going to need to have some alignment of that conversation. Now, I don't literally mean lockstep alignment. I think one of the mistakes of the conversation so far at the K-12 level is not enough involvement of the people from the higher ed side about what does college ready actually mean. It would help if we had more higher ed people in the room to describe what college ready actually is. And I don't mean to caricature that, but I think that that would help strengthen the equation. At the same time, higher ed's going to have to respond in some very meaningful ways in terms of its admissions processes, its college placement processes, its assessment systems, in order to be able to better align with what I think are going to be quality improvements that we're going to be seeing at the K-12 level.
I think politicians do understand this. That is, they read the same polls that, they read a lot more of them actually, than most of the rest of us do. And that number, I can tell you, comes up over and over again. It is no accident that in the last 2 presidential campaigns, access to higher education in both platforms, it moved as the economy moved, even as the economy collapsed. It went from 2 to 3, never fell before 4 in any speech I heard. The way political leadership is dealing with this, because they're in a box. The box they're in is they don't have any money. And they've got to make very hard decisions about whether they're going to take money away from old people or young people. In the end, it's going to be young people, because young people are resilient. I can tell you old people aren't. So there is a, so I have a horse in this race, so forgive me for that. But there is a recognition of this. So what you heard in the last presidential campaign, and I would note in the one before, you heard the same thing. And that was, the political answer is we're going to make college affordable. So there is an implicit assumption in that, is that we're going to make college universally available. That's really what they've been saying. The Bush administration, interestingly, was the first presidential statement on this. It was in their higher ed commission that most people didn't like very much, where they said, and it's something of an ambiguous sentence, where they said, I think literally, everybody doesn't need to go to college, stop, but everybody needs some post-secondary education. Somehow 2-year schools were no longer college. But there is the only way I can make sense out of that sentence. But in the end, this is generally, they understand that the voters want access to post-secondary education for their children. So there is, and the answer is affordability. The question then is, what does affordability mean? And the answer is, we don't have much money, you're going to have to do more with less. I think that's what they're saying. They then shift the blame for the problem towards higher education. That is, the problem is it's not affordable. Not that it shouldn't be universally available, and that's where it resides. It's not that hard to do, to shift it to the institution, because it's just like when anybody, 2 things you know in political polls. One is gas prices are the only prices, if you're a politician, you have to worry about, because everybody stands at the pump and watches the meter. So everybody knows about gas prices. The other thing is you get a tuition bill. I can tell you as somebody who's worked with politicians. They all know that. There are 2 things one is the gas pump and the other is the tuition bill. And so it's not hard for them to say the price of gas has got to go down and the price of college has got to go down. Then the next question is, how do you do that? And we've really come up somewhat empty on that, I think, quite frankly.
Yes, question here.
Good afternoon. My name is Patty Demetrius, and I'm from Fairfax County Public Schools. And you started to address my question, but maybe you could go into it a little bit more. Can you address the increasingly expensive costs of higher ed, especially for those students whose parents do not have a college credential?
Look, the gaps between the haves and the have-nots are growing, and I think part of what we need to increasingly recognize that ignoring those gaps comes at our collective peril. This is no longer an issue of trying to do better by those who are less fortunate. What we are talking about is the majority of our population now, and the emerging majorities of Latinos and the large numbers of African Americans and first-generation college goers, the huge numbers of adults who absolutely have to be trained or retrained at the post-secondary level because the jobs that they had, which were middle-class jobs, no longer afford them that middle-class lifestyle. They lost them. They need to get some post-secondary education. The critical piece of all of this, in my opinion, however, is that we've got to get serious about a new kind of social compact for those families. That is, we've got to find a different way of articulating the value of higher education for them. And I've spent most of my career as a ardent advocate for need-based financial aid, and nothing's going to change that. I was a Pell Grant recipient. I was a Pell Grant advocate. I get why that's so important. But the reality of the cost of higher education for those populations that you're talking about are simply too high. I think the solution is going to not come on the price side unless we agree to price controls, which I think have all kinds of negative effects, and I wouldn't support government price controls. Government can't control the price of anything, let alone something as complex as higher education. So I think price controls would not be the right way to do it. The only way to do it is to deal with it on the cost side. And that's going to mean that that delivery model for higher education is going to have to change. We have got to have a more productive system of higher education, productive meaning both efficient but also effective, focusing on those learning outcomes that the public expects through this Gallup poll that we need to deliver on in terms of high-quality learning that leads to a good job, et cetera. So this is part of our challenge for those populations that you're talking about. The failure to deliver on that, however, is going to, I think, really impact our collective well-being and our economic and social future as a country.
The one thing I would add to that is it's why the governor and Tom were up here before talking about technology. For me, it's always like fresh air. It's something I don't know much about, and it sounds like maybe they've got an answer. And I've heard enough people do that. I heard Hillary Pennington do it a few weeks ago in Richmond, talking to the Virginia higher ed system leadership, and she made me feel the same way. Intuitively, it makes so much sense. The only thing that bothers me about it is I've been hearing that now for about 30 years. But as somebody who is an expert in this area said to me a number of years ago, and I think there's some truth to it, he said, Tony, you judge things in terms of your own lifetime, and really that's not very long. It feels long sometimes. But he said, we've been at this for 30, 40 years with technology. It'll take another 30 or 40 to do it. And in the meantime, we're going to have a problem delivering high-quality education universally in the United States, and that'll simply be a difficulty we'll struggle through until the technology comes online.
Another question. You have a question down. Oh, yes, go ahead. You've got a mic.
Yes. My name is Camilla Thigpen. I'm a first-year master's student here at the George Washington University School of Education. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about the perception that once you actually do obtain a post-secondary education, that you're still not prepared to go into the workforce. And as someone that's a relatively new entrant into the workforce, I want to speak a little bit from my perspective. I think there's a lot of reasons for that, but two of them that come to mind, one of them you mentioned already, was that the fact that students need to be strategic about choosing a major. And when you come into your undergraduate degree, I feel like there's very little guidance about not only what's going on in the market now, but what will be going on in 4 years, so you can figure out what you should be strategically doing to get there. But I think more importantly is what experience you're getting while you're in school, internships specifically. And I know that this past year that summer jobs for young people were very low, and the opportunity of getting one was difficult. And so when you are in school and you don't have that work experience and you're graduating, that makes you less competitive and less able to get a job. So what do you think the opportunities are for providing incentives for the business sector to expand internship programs, to make sure that those things aren't cut when the economy kind of goes south, and just to help students have more work experience when they're leaving college?
Look, there's a growing number of efforts that are trying to connect with this, although I would say that we have a lot more work to do. So lots of organizations, I mentioned a few of them, the Business Roundtable, Committee for Economic Development, Skills for America's Future, many others are trying to elevate this issue, which is that work-based experiences combined with education can actually enhance the learning process and lead to higher quality outcomes. But the degree itself, the credential itself, is really the prerequisite. It's not going to be a guarantee of that high-quality job. You're going to need to augment that with other things in order to enhance your chances for success. And the kinds of things that you're talking about are important. One issue that I think our employers need to step forward on is doing a better job of actually participating in that process rather than lamenting the incomplete job that they're getting from our higher education system. Now, let's be clear, employers are clearly paying a premium for people with college degrees. So they believe very strongly that that's important. But they're also telling us they need more and they need different. And I think those different kinds of learning outcomes that we're talking about through things like internships would be an important way in which they can invest directly in that success.
Got a question back here.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Zanita Daver, and I'm with the New Leadership Alliance for Student Learning and Accountability. And one of the things I think that maybe is a little bit unfortunate about the results is that students and families are continuing to pay the high cost of higher education. And so the legislature sees those results. They know that they can reduce the amount of money that they're giving to state institutions, and families and students are going to keep paying for it. And then in the end, it's sort of a detriment to the entire system. And I kind of look at it like all market forces until maybe students and families stand up and say, we're not going to pay and we're not going to attend. We don't have enough, I guess, ammunition, I want to say, to force colleges to change and really look at the prices. So I sort of feel as though as long as people are going to be willing to pay, colleges and universities aren't going to be forced to change as quickly, and that's unfortunate.
There's an issue, you know, we've gotten to the end of the rope in a growing number of states on the raise tuition, cut budget strategy. The truth is that the tuitions have been raised to a level that are extraordinary, that are causing problems. And at the same time, you see states like California where there are legitimate capacity issues in the system now, right? The California community colleges cannot serve the needs of a growing number of people. Literally, they don't have the capacity to do that. So there's something happening on the ground here where I think we are starting to go over the cliff on the cut some more and use tuition as the deus ex machina to make everything level after all is said and done. And that's where I think these efforts to improve productivity are going to become increasingly important. We've invested in 7 different states on improving productivity efforts. We're trying a variety of different approaches to do that. But we think that's sort of the camel's nose under the tent. There's got to be a widespread acceptance of this idea that improving productivity is going to be critical to the success of the system. Not the old way, which is make faculty teach more. That was a wasted effort, in my opinion. What we've got to do is engage the faculty, find ways to bring them into the equation to help get to those learning outcomes that are going to lead to the high quality success that we need in order to be successful.
One more question, and then I think we'll need to wrap up. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Charles McCullough, Embassy of Australia. My question for you goes to what you were saying, Anthony, about the folks, in response to the last question, about focusing on the degree and improving the degree. And especially given what we've heard in this poll about perceptions of the value of that degree itself. I know in Australia, universities, government, and businesses have come together several years ago in developing a qualifications framework that allowed universities themselves to really focus on student learning outcomes in awarding degrees. That being said, how do you suggest that here in the United States, institutions of higher education can come together to focus, instead of keeping the focus on credit hours, move to more of a focus in awarding the degrees on learning outcomes? So things that you may know about, Anthony, or things that you also may know about as far as what are happening with Lumina.
Well, a quick advertisement for our own work, and our own work is sort of built on the backs of the great work that's been done by AAC&U and others on defining learning outcomes of higher education, which is we've developed what you've seen in many other countries in the world, which is a first attempt to define the competencies that should be demonstrated by people at the associate, bachelor's, and master's degree, irrespective of the field of study. We call this a degree qualification profile. Many countries call this a qualification framework. We've produced what we call a beta version, and because we don't think we have it right, but we're trying to test this idea of actually defining those competencies in ways where faculty, institutional leaders, policymakers can actually put their hands on this and better understand what the potential uses of this kind of a framework might be. Now, I want to be clear that I think that ultimately that has to be owned at the delivery level, that is, at the institutional level. That's where the teaching and learning takes place. So I'm not in favor of a nationally articulated system that all colleges and universities would have to drive themselves through. But I think the reality of American higher education is that we cannot in any meaningful way describe what an associate degree actually represents and what it is, or what a bachelor's degree or what a master's degree actually is. And that's the same conversation we've been having at the K-12 level. So I think this credit hour-based system is going to need to be replaced with a learning outcome-based system where we can better articulate what those degrees represent at each of those levels of qualification.
All right. Let me turn it back to Shane, but first, Jamie and Tony, thank you very much for...
We're almost at the end of our time. I have a quick report, a couple of, lots of thanks and a couple of invitations. The report, so remember I asked you to think about issues that bridge across K through 12 and higher ed, the will of the people, and then kind of some policy implications. I did the assignment myself, hopefully you did it as well. I'm thinking about great teaching. I'm thinking about how great teaching requires talent upon the individual, a wonderful training program in a college or university, and then a wonderful workplace within a K through 12 system. I believe that we can invest more in great teaching by coming up with either 50 individual state plans or an American plan for recruiting and retaining great teachers. We don't have that. Finland has that, Singapore has that, Korea has that. We don't have that. I also believe that policymakers can just love on that idea a whole bunch, because it allows them to show that they have talented people in their communities, that they can then get people interested in education and then turn them into great teachers who come back and serve in their communities. So hopefully you had a chance to kind of wrangle with an idea that bridges the two sectors, that really is kind of at the heart of the public will and something we can tackle with good policy. A bunch of thanks. I want to thank you, Dean, for giving us this wonderful place and this wonderful time. Thank you so much. I want to thank two strong educational leaders, Jamie and Bill. Thank you so much for your leadership on these polls. I want to thank Tony and Dwayne and Bob and Tom for the commentaries as well. Thank you so much. Behind the scenes, we had three people that worked on these two polls a whole lot at Gallup. That's Dr. Connie Raff, Jason Milton, and Dr. Valerie Calderon. So I want to thank them as well. I want to thank you all for coming here and investing your time. And I want to challenge you to recreate these wonderful discussions about the poll results. An invitation, two quick invitations. One, we have this other poll on education we call the Gallup Student Poll. Every October, we turn the Gallup Student Poll on, and for no fee, every student in the country, grades 5 through 12, could complete the Gallup Student Poll. We measure those things that make you successful in life, in school and life, hope, engagement, and well-being. So I encourage you to tax our system come October by encouraging every district you know to take part in the Gallup Student Poll. And next, I want to invite you upstairs for our reception. Thank you so much.